Hello and welcome to Marketing Speak. I'm your host, Stefan Spencer, and today I'm very happy to have Lisa Magnuson with us. Lisa has walked in the shoes of sales leaders. She was an award-winning sales manager and led the charge as a sales VP for several Fortune 50 companies. Totaling over 35 years of experience, Lisa has worked with large, medium, and small corporate clients across a broad spectrum of industries. She's also the author of The Top Seller Advantage and the Top Sales Leader Playbook. Lisa, it's so great to have you on the show.
Thanks, Stefan. Happy to be here.
Well, let's start talking about why a playbook. What's with a playbook? How does that differ from the traditional kind of sales book on closing techniques and prospecting and everything else?
That's a great question. And the reason why is because when you're thinking about your biggest deals, I call them 5X deals. It means about 5 times your average deal size. So let's say your average deal size is about $100,000, 5X deal, 500,000 roughly. But when you are engaging in identifying, developing, and closing that kind of large contract, you don't do the same things. You do all the things that you do for your normal sales process, plus a lot more. And so why a playbook? The playbook is all about the what else do I have to do if I'm engaging in a large contract like that.
So what makes the difference to get a 5X deal over a traditional 1X deal that you typically get?
Yeah, it just, a 5X deal is complex in nature. There's going to be more people on the buying team. There's going to be more people on your, what I call the account team. So you've got more people on both sides. It's going to take a little bit longer. And you have to do a lot of internal strategy work over time to position yourselves, the account team, to win a deal like that. Many times it includes multiple proposals, maybe an RFI, RFQ, RFP, presentations. So it happens over time. And in almost all situations, it's very competitive. I don't actually know how that happens, but whenever I'm working with account teams on a big deal, somehow those nasty competitors just show up.
Right. So, yeah, a good point here. Like, what if there are 10 or 15 other competitors vying for the deal? That might seem unwinnable.
Yeah. I don't know that I can ever recall 10 or 15. That's a very large number, but maybe at the beginning. But it usually boils down to 3 to 5 competitors as you're kind of going through the process, and that's part of the strategy. I mean, the account team has to see if they can identify who the competitors are early, and then as they get into the development of the opportunity, they have to do some competitive analysis, and they have to think about proactive and reactive blocking. So is there anything that we can do proactively to just stop those competitors in their tracks? Or if that's not possible, how can we block them reactively? What can we do? And there's not just one answer to that question, which is why these 5X deals require that dedication of that account team to really put the thought and the discussion and the debate into these conversations over time.
Okay, so let's talk about how to write a proposal that is light years beyond what any competitor would put together.
Well, the proposal is a critical stage in the process, certainly. And I've been involved with large deals where the proposals are literally hundreds of pages. Doesn't have to be that way, though. Just depends on the opportunity, the industry, the company. But what does absolutely have to happen is the account team needs to have done a lot of work before you ever get to the proposal. They need to have built relationships, lots of them, not just one or two. They have to have really thought about the whole strategy landscape and have their strategy in place. They have to have developed win themes. And what win themes are is the intersection between the prospect's priorities and, in my case, my client's strengths. So it's that intersection that creates that sweet spot of receptivity. And absolutely, you can't go to the proposal stage until you have those firmly in place. And you start developing those early and they just evolve. But by the time you get to propose, that needs to be crystal clear, not just what those priorities are, but why are they important to the prospect? Where do your strengths match and align? And then what evidence can you share to reinforce it?
Do you delineate all that in the proposal?
You delineate some of that in the proposal, certainly. I don't think there's just one way to do a proposal. When I work with my clients on proposals, it absolutely changes from company to company, industry to industry. But yes, and some proposals are more like presentations. It has to be based on those win themes. So in some cases, it looks like, where are they now? What are the gaps? What are those outcomes they're seeking? That can look like that in the proposal, or it can look like, here's your priorities and here's how we can impact those priorities. So it looks different, but yes, has to be there. One way or another has to be there.
Right. And typically, are your clients seeing RFPs or RFQs come in first that they have to respond to with a proposal, or is it just like, here's my boilerplate proposal for you, Mr. or Ms. Client?
Yeah, the sad truth about that, and you probably know this from your experience as well, is if you get an RFP and you haven't had a long engagement period with the prospect, you have less than 15% chance of winning that RFP. So over the years, I've built a lot of tools that help teams decide if they even want to put time, effort into responding to an RFP where they haven't developed the relationships, where they haven't laid out a strategy, where they don't know who the competitors are, or what options the prospect is thinking about to solve their problem. Last year, we saw that most prospects stayed with the status quo. Even if they weren't totally happy with the status quo, they didn't want to put the ergs of energy to look. They didn't want to open themselves to any risk whatsoever. So the status quo kind of became the default. And that's always been a big competitor, but it really accelerated last year. So it's not just your competitors. You have to also think about the status quo as a competitor.
Yeah.
And if you're the incumbent, of course, that can work to your favor.
Right. Well, there's this old adage or expression that no one ever lost their job by hiring IBM, which is classic FUD, which stands for fear, uncertainty, and doubt. And that's how these entrenched competitors scare the prospect or their client, I guess it could be a prospect as well, to not go with the smaller, more superior company in technology.
Yeah, that's funny. I got my start in sales with Xerox years ago, and it's also funny that young people have never really heard of Xerox. It was such a big company as I was coming up, had awesome sales training and sales development, but we tried to change that old adage from IBM to insert Xerox instead. Play that to our advantage.
Right. And did that work?
Sometimes it did, absolutely, because Xerox, back in those days, tended to be the IBM of the industry where they played in.
Right. How do you increase your chances? If it's 15% chance, do you try to increase your chances of winning when it's an RFP situation and you didn't already have a relationship with the prospect, or do you just not waste your time?
There's not a single answer to that question. My clients handle that very differently. I have some clients that really have a culture where they will respond to an RFP, even if they didn't have that long track record of engagement. So they're going to respond anyway. I was just part of an account team with another client, where we did, I have a kind of a pre-bid success calculator, just kind of a series of questions to help the team sort of understand, they had that robust sales runway, and kind of spits out a result. But the result was low and they decided to pass, and it's, not pass permanently on the prospect, but, not this time around. They weren't in a position to win. And I thought they made a really good decision. So it just depends. But I think the biggest thing I try to talk to my clients about is, one, to make sure you're not in that position. But two, if you do find yourself in that position where you don't have relationships developed, you don't know what alternatives they're looking at, you haven't had the chance to do the strategy work over time, then at least stop and consider where you are. And if you're going to decide to go forward, okay, but make a decision, understanding the current state.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I'm curious, what is the difference between an RFP, an RFQ, and an RFI?
Well, I'll answer that story with a very short, funny answer first. So, one of my larger deals, this was some years ago with one of my clients at the time, was ended up being a $30 million deal. It was not my largest now, but at the time it was a big deal. And that prospect for them did all three. So they did an RFI, request for information, RFQ, request for quote, and then RFP, request for proposal. And so it's just kind of like Groundhog Day for that account team because, we just kept preparing.
How about an RFB, request for busy work?
It felt a little bit like that, but in the end, in that particular situation, it was worth it because they won, and it was worth $30 million. And to my knowledge, they still have that client today, so it's continued to evolve and grow for them. But that's not typical. Usually, it's RFPs. In my experience, are kind of the most typical. And then every once in a while, you get kind of a request for information. They're trying to weed people out, shorten that list. Or RFQ, how much is this going to cost us to solve this problem? Is the investment going to be worth the effort to solve the problem is usually what they're looking at with an RFQ.
I gotcha. Okay.
Yeah.
So it sounds like the RFP is maybe further along than an RFI, and our RFP is probably more work to prepare.
It is. Generally, they're more work. Although it's interesting, Stefan, what I have seen lately, again, last year was we learned so many lessons last year. And in the sales world, boy, sellers have to really pay attention to those lessons from last year and change their approach. But one of the things that we learned is, customers, prospects are just like us. The world is complex, lots of things going on. We've all been through a lot. So they're not operating at peak, efficiency. So what does that look like? Well, we have to keep things really simple, and they're trying to make things simple for themselves. So for the first time, really, I'm seeing activity that's, even RFP activity that's very limited. Like, maybe a traditional RFP, let's say it might have, 30 questions. I'm seeing RFPs with 10 questions. I'm seeing, presentations where they only want to talk about 3 points, limiting the time, limiting the amount of slides. I worked with a client a couple months ago, and their prospect limited the slides to 12. So prospects just don't have the appetite or the bandwidth to be involved with these labor intensive, massive proposals, massive presentations. And salespeople have to really kind of respond. They have to understand what that means. They have to keep things simple. They have to keep things risk-free. They have to figure out how to add value at every single stage of the sales process. And in order to figure out what that value is, they really need to put themselves in their prospect's shoes. What is the buying team doing, thinking, feeling at any given time? Because there's not one way to add value. They're seeking different value at different stages. So all of that, the answers to those questions happen in what I call war rooms, which are really just account strategy sessions or prospect strategy sessions. And to really have these big deals, account teams are meeting in this way every couple weeks, every 3 weeks, certainly every month, and they're building on their understanding, they're building on the value, they're building their strategy, they're doing that competitive analysis. That's the key, is the account team commitment over time and the work that they do. And that's how you improve your win ratios, period. Is to do that work over time, and you'll put yourself in the best position to win.
Okay, so what do these war room meetings look like? Do you have sample agendas, or maybe I don't know, a YouTube video of a war room taking place or anything like that?
Yes, yes, and yes. My playbook that has the 16 plays, it goes through, it has sample war room agendas. It talks about who should be there, how to set it up, sample agendas. Also has a chapter on pre-call planning that we are just talking about and win themes. So it has all that. Also, I've been a sales expert on the Bright Talk platform, the Sales Experts channel, for 4 years. I actually have a regular show this year, third Thursday of every month, and I talk about war rooms. I talk about win themes. I talk about what changed last year and what we need to do. One of them was sort of a case study of a $40 million deal. So absolutely, yes, yes, and yes. People can get my book. They can find me on the Sales Experts channel. All of the Bright Talk webinars are free. And all my webinars this year are video only, short, 15 minutes, right to the point.
Gotcha. Okay. So
Yeah.
can we go through some of these 16 plays?
Yeah, that's a lot of plays to go through.
Well, we don't have to
What
go through
might
all 16. Let's just pick at least maybe 2 or 3.
Yeah, so the plays are broken up into kind of 4 quadrants, and one is sort of the leadership quadrant. One is the methodology. So, in other words, what steps are need to be taken to identify, develop, and close really big deals. One is the execution. So, execution. Like war rooms fall into the execution part because you are executing on the methodology and the leadership had to be there before you really can do that. And then the last thing is culture. What does a 5X deal culture look like in a company that doesn't just get one, but they can repeatedly get these big deals? So those are kind of the 4 parts to the book. There's plays inside of each of those parts. And the plays, it's very practical. So for each play, it's like, what is the play? What are the steps to execute the play? What are the yellow and red flags when it's not working? And what can you do? What are the remedies? For every play, I literally searched the world for who I thought was the best coach on that particular play. So I have what I call a sideline coach expert opinion. And that's just a page or two of an expert on that play, their perspective, and then examples. So it's a really practical book for companies that really are interested in bigger deals and putting some things in place. I'm not trying to sell my book as much as just say it's a great investment. It's a very inexpensive investment to get quite a lot of practical information.
Wow. What inspired you to write this book?
I have been in this space my whole career. I like to tell the story of when I started in sales with Xerox in Oakland, California. I was lucky enough as a young salesperson to get on the Clorox account team. Clorox wipes, cleaners, everybody knows Clorox. They're headquartered in Oakland, California. And the national account manager and that team they had contracts in place, they had executive engagement, they had all this stuff. I didn't participate, I wasn't part of any of that. I just kind of was lucky enough to come on to this team. And so I'll never forget my first meeting with my contact at Clorox. Go to downtown Oakland, big building, elevators. I'm completely nervous, just brand new, Xerox salesperson. Go up, we sit down, and at that time, my monthly target was about sell about 4 Xerox machines per month. And I sit down with this Clorox, person, and she goes, "Nice to meet you. We're probably going to place about 35 orders for this month." And I almost fell off my chair. I'm like, 35? She goes, "Yeah, we're going to be selling, we need to send these here, all over the country, right?" I couldn't even believe it. And so very early in my career, I figured out that big deals and big contracts and big customers are really good. I was at least smart enough to figure that out. Now, I think I don't deserve any credit for any of that. A lot of people put a lot of things in place so I could walk into that office and get an order for 35 when my budget was 4. But I was smart enough to figure out that was a good thing. And So I just literally very early, I always have been attracted to the big deals, and now with my clients over the last 16 years, that's really all I focus on is those big deals, those complex deals, and my clients know that I am refreshing the information on that like monthly, weekly in some cases. So it's not something that worked years ago. I mean, everything changed last year. We had to change everything. And so it's, I'm in the field with my clients doing this kind of work, and I love it. I'm very competitive. I love to win with them.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about some of the things that have changed. Yeah, it's very different these days versus 2 years ago. How did you
Yep.
change your approach or your clients' approaches?
Yeah, I think that, we talked about clients, are overwhelmed. So one of the things that changed is as a salesperson, you have to keep things simple. Conversations have to be simple. Next steps have to be simple. Proposals have to be simple. Everything has to be simple. That's one thing. People's tolerance for risk. All of a sudden, everything feels so risky in the world that we live in. So they don't want to make bad decisions. I mean, that's always been there, but it really accelerated last year. So you have to bring that up. You have to talk about it. You have to ask them questions like, hey, do you or your buying team perceive any risk with making this change? Or what risk do you perceive? You have to ask them. You have to get it on the table. It can't, it's part of the sales questions and the conversation you're going to have. So that's another thing. The other thing is, team, prospects are engaging salespeople much later in the sales process. It's not, there's a Gartner statistic around this, but they've done a lot of the work. They've identified they have a problem. They've said, yeah, we think we're going to solve this problem. They've pulled together a team. They've started to define that. Maybe they've started to work on their internal business case. And then maybe you get brought in. So they've done their research. So what does that look like for sales? Sales has to be so educated. You have to be, you have to do your research, but more than that, do your research, figure out where they are, figure out where they are in their process, figure out how you can add value. And I find that salespeople really find that hard. Like they think they're experts in sales versus experts in adding value. And so one of the things I do with my clients is I have salespeople list all the value that they can bring to their clients. Like I literally have them make a list to think it through so that they can pull from that list at different points. Because you can't add all the value all the time. You have to sprinkle it according to, what value the prospect is seeking. And then all of this is, kind of culminates in what I call is pre-call planning is no longer optional. No longer optional. I am just relentless around pre-call planning. Some of my colleagues that are sales consultants are as well, but it's just no longer optional. So if you are not making comprehensive pre-call planning a habit before every customer conversation, you are putting yourself at a disadvantage. The customer will have no bandwidth for that, and they're not going to advance with you. They probably might not even meet with you again. So that's hard for salespeople. It's hard for them to develop that discipline. But the ones that do are seeing the results. They're getting the 5X deals. They're getting next calls. They're getting contracts. And so it maybe was never optional, but it's absolutely not optional anymore.
So, what's involved in pre-call planning?
That's a great question. And, I like to answer that question by starting with what's not, what it isn't. So when I talk to salespeople about pre-call planning, if they're not a long-term client, they will say that they do pre-call planning. And then when I dive into it, that a little bit further, I find out that they really don't. They might think about the call. They might make a few notes. They might do some cursory research. They may or may not send an agenda in advance. And not all of that is part of it, but it's not sufficient. It's not 100% not sufficient. So what is required for every single call that you want to have be as good a call as possible is you have to first start with where you're at in the sales process and where the customer is in their buying process. What are they doing, thinking, feeling right now? So it has to start from their perspective. Then you have to do your research, and it's not just gathering data. You're looking for insights. You're looking for questions that add value, not just questions that you want to know. What would cause your customer to think differently or expand their thinking or consider something else? Those are valuable questions for them. So you're looking for that when you're doing your research. Then you do all your normal other social, website, all that kind of stuff. And you always send an agenda in advance. I mean, unless you're going to dinner or lunch or something or a golf outing, even then, I recommend that salespeople have an agenda. They're just not going to share it with the prospect or the customer. So always have an agenda. Always send it in advance. There's literally no downside to doing that, and there's so much upside. So those are some of the table stakes, but the pre-call planning, once you do all that, it really starts with that customer. Who's going to be at their meeting? What's their disposition? What's their persona? What do they care about? All that kind of stuff, some analysis about the people that are going to be in the meeting. Then what do they want to get out of the meeting? What are their goals for the meeting? Not their big picture goals, just for the meeting. Like they accepted a meeting for a reason. What was that reason? What would make it good for them? Think about that. Then the salespeople can think about their goals for the meeting. Well, those have to be in alignment. If they're not in alignment, first red flag. Then you want to think about some next steps. I call those advances because it's not just next steps that the salesperson does, but they have to be things that both people are participating in. So I like best, next best. So yeah, you want to think about, what does the customer want to accomplish? What do you want to accomplish? Are they aligned? Then what are some logical next steps, best and next best? And the reason why you want a couple, and in some cases, maybe even three, but you don't want to be so fixated on one next step that you are participating in the meeting, in the conversation, like the thing that you might have wanted isn't going to happen. So if you're prepared with a backup option or options, then you can solidify generally a next step that's right for the meeting. So after you do that, you think about then, like some of the questions that you might want to ask, good questions. I'm never a fan of memorizing things or verbatim things, but you can think about that while you're planning so you don't have to think about it in the moment. And the list doesn't have to be long, maybe it's 5-6 things that you really want to ask about. Kind of think about that. Then you could think about what could go wrong in the meeting. And there's always something. The main person, only has 10 minutes or they don't come. One person takes over the conversation, derails. There's all kinds of things that can go wrong, especially if you know the prospect. Think about those. And then think about what can you do to prevent those things. A lot of times sending an agenda in advance and asking for input can help prevent a lot of stuff. But there's lots of ways to prevent. And so you think about that in advance. And then once you've done all that, you think about your win themes. If you're a little bit downstream a little bit, if it's an initial conversation, you're not going to know those. But if you're in like the develop stage, you should really know those win themes, those priorities, why they're important. So you're going to think about those too. And then once you've done all that, then you build your agenda. Always custom, always focus on the customer, nice flow. You time it out, make sure it fits within their time frame. This is your internal agenda. You're not going to send them this probably. This is your kind of internal working agenda. You can slot your questions in where they fall logically, and then you can develop an external version of that and send it to the customer. And I know that sounds like a lot, but if it's a habit, it can happen very quickly. It literally can happen in 15 minutes.
Do you have a set of templates for these agendas?
Oh, that's the best question so far. It was like a perfect setup. Yes, I do. I am literally just a maniac about pre-call planning. So I have made my two-page fillable PDF pre-call plan available on my website for free. And this is something, a week has not gone by in 16 years where I haven't done pre-call planning with one of my clients for one of their meetings. I'm always doing this work. So I'm always updating this tool. And so your listeners can go to my website, www.toplinesales.com. It's at the bottom of the resources page. And yes, you do have to enter your information because then you're going to get my newsletter. But that's a fair exchange for the value of the pre-call plan. It's simple, it's 2 pages, it's a fillable PDF, so it just kind of takes you through that thought process, works like a charm. I use it myself all the time.
Awesome.
Thank you for asking that question.
Well, thank you for offering that. That's great. Now, if somebody is wanting to kind of outsource this and not have to do all the planning and the closing and all that, do you recommend that they hire an outside firm for this? Do you recommend that they bring in a sales manager or VP of sales who then builds the team? Like, what's the process for somebody who doesn't want to do the selling themselves, or maybe they're just tired of doing it themselves?
Yeah, I've never gotten that question before. That's really interesting. So sales organizations can outsource a lot of things. They can outsource their outbound lead generation, their inbound lead things. They can outsource what's called, SDR, sales development reps, kind of those people that are trying to qualify and set appointments. All of that can be really nicely outsourced. And there's tons of good companies that do that. I am not familiar with any company over my years that outsources their biggest deals, these big deals. It's ingrained in the culture. Usually you have to have the executive team involved at some point. Might be a concession, might be playing a part in the presentation or something. The executive team is almost always involved in some way. So I've never known a company to outsource this function. But does there need to be somebody, a leader who has experience and bandwidth and a comprehension of how to install a 5X, culture in the organization? Absolutely. It's generally a VP of sales, kind of somebody at that level that says, this is a priority. And some organizations are very sophisticated. They have whole divisions, national account divisions, global account divisions, and that's all they do is big customers, big deals. But for most companies, it's a VP of sales that leads the charge. And this might not be all they do, but it's a piece of what they do. And then there's consultants like myself. And so, I don't come in and run this for companies, but I come in and augment and help and provide that outside expertise. But sometimes I work with companies that actually have most of the expertise. They kind of just need somebody to keep them on track and to facilitate and keep them moving forward. And a lot of times I play that role too. So of course, I think it's a good idea to bring in outside expertise, someone like myself, but I have can't think of a situation where a company that I'm aware of has actually outsourced the entire function of going after big deals.
Gotcha. Well, there are a couple of companies I know of that do this sort of thing. One is called Metagrowth. They'll build the entire team for you. They'll recruit them, train them, replace any of them that have left, and will continue to upskill them as time goes on. And they take.
Do they specialize in the medical field?
No, they don't specialize in any particular niche. Yeah, so they have a set fee that they charge plus a percentage of the deal.
Interesting.
Yeah, and then the team members they recruit are all commission only salespeople.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it is an interesting model, and then there's another company that does something similar, but they work with more senior level people, whereas Metagrowth works with more junior people who may not even have any sales experience, and then they train them up. There's a company called Coffee that will somehow bring in seasoned top sellers, and they will get them selling your stuff. And
big deals. Yeah. So that's I'm not familiar with those companies. Your comment about the one company that has commission only is a little, when I come into companies, and I've worked with lots of them over 16 years, and prior to that worked for a lot of companies, but the people that really lead the charge for the big deals, these are your best people. I've never, I can't even think of a situation where they've been 100% commission. These are your best people. They are paid well. Commissions are a part of it, but generally companies that I'm familiar with, if it's 100% commission, those are like, you're starting salespeople. You're not investing in them. You're going to have that turnover. But generally, at the other end of the spectrum, biggest opportunities, biggest clients, big companies, those are very tenured people that that really can do this kind of work that we're talking about. So I'm not familiar with them, but I'll look into them.
Yeah.
Things are always changing, and there's never just one way to get something done.
That's true. That's true.
Yeah.
So
Thank you for sharing that.
you bet. What do you think of a typical commission structure and base salary? What are the ranges? How do you incentivize them so that they keep selling bigger and bigger deals, and then they get out there and pound the pavement, so to speak?
Yeah, I am not an expert on that. I hesitate to even comment on it because there's people that specialize in commission structures and striking that right balance. What I can say as it relates to big deals, and one of my sideline coaches made this point in my playbook, is sometimes for really big deals, companies, if you want to have a culture around big deals, you have to be willing to be a little bit flexible. So you might, as a company, you might have a commission structure that, let's say it goes January to December. That's common, right? Fiscal year, you've got targets, you have a commission structure, anything that closes, by December 31st, you're paid on under that structure. But when big deals don't always fall within that structure, maybe it's a 15-month sales process. Maybe it's an 18-month sales process. And so companies that really want to embrace a big deal culture have to be willing to make exceptions, because to really understand that big deals don't always fall within a standard commission structure. Another example of where there might be exceptions is we're talking generally team selling. So is there a structure that incents team selling? And it could just be bonuses. It could be recognition. There's lots of ways to do it. But you might have a selling team. Even the core selling team could be 5, 6 people. And then you might have another 8, 9 resources on top of that. People that are actively working an account opportunity over, 9 months, 12 months, 18 months. How are you going to compensate that team? Not just the main account executive. So there are exceptions that need to be made if companies truly want to remove the barriers to going after really big deals. That's the only thing that I can't comment on. Okay. One thing I can tell you, I lived, I think, every version of a commission structure when I was with Xerox. Every year it changed. So I do have that experience.
So who do you send folks to if they need help with getting a commission structure in place, or kind of retooling their existing structure?
Generally the companies, I used to have a resource that I would send smaller companies to, and it was another consultant, and he got out of that line of work. He changed his practice. But generally the companies that I work with, sort of the mid-sized companies, are my sweet spot, 20 million to 300 million, some, in that range. They have experts on staff that can benchmark and can do those things. We don't generally talk about it. I will bring up if I see a roadblock or an issue, I'll bring it up, but I'm not necessarily the person that needs to solve it. So that's sort of my role, with as it relates to big deals.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah.
Let's move on to the topic of budgets. So salespeople will have budgets. Also, the client or prospect will have a budget that they can work within. How do you figure out, as the salesperson, what the available budget is? And of course, the prospect doesn't want to give that away oftentimes, because then they're going to expect a proposal that uses up the entire budget, even if it was going to cost half that if they didn't know what the budget was. So Yeah, let's talk about the dynamics of that and how to kind of make this workable for everybody.
Yeah, that's a great question, and actually, I just am working on a kind of a module, a training module, and focusing on the qualifying stage for big deals. So not for simple or straightforward deals, for complex opportunities. And my point is really, and I'm not alone in this point. You have to think of the qualify stages as layers. So there can be some early qualifying that occurs, some kind of core qualifying, and then there's also advanced qualifying. And the answer to your question sort of fits in to one of these, or maybe a version of all three. So, if you're engaging with a big opportunity, you're going to do some early qualifying. Are they a fit for your product and services? Do you have that, the alignment? Are you going to have access to the people that are going to be making the decision? You're going to kind of figure that out, try to learn about those, that structure, how they're going to make that decision. And then you kind of get into the core qualifying. And this doesn't always mean it's different meetings. This could all be in one meeting. It could be in a series of meetings over months. I've seen both. So, but it's just recognizing that qualifying isn't just one thing, but kind of that core qualifying is now you're really thinking about, do they have a problem that they're committed to solve? Have they allocated the resources? And budget falls in that, but it's not just budget. It's have they allocated the people, the resources? Are they really committed to march down this path and solve the problem? We all have problems. Doesn't mean we're going to take actions to solve them all the time. And so that's kind of that core qualifying. Might be discussion about budget ranges. And if the prospect tries to get you to give them a price at this stage, you really can't do that. You cannot, from a core qualifying stage, you can't give them a price, because then they're going to start to make decisions based on that. But you can give them an idea, you can give them a range, you can talk about what else needs to sort of occur till you can get to a proposal. So that would be kind of that discussion. And then, like the advanced qualify kind of discussion can be around, like their internal business case. Do they have to create one? What might that look like? Do they need some help with it? What kinds of budget approvals do they need to get inside of that? Who are the people that are going to need to allocate the funds? What kind of procurement process do they have? What are they seeing as the options to solve their problem, and the pros and cons of each of those options? So, it's like a discussion that has to evolve, that includes money and budget, but it's not. A lot of times salespeople treat that as a once and done kind of thing, and that's a mistake. It should be, at least in a complex sales process, it should be a conversation that evolves logically, and you can help them, give them some information. But if you try to shortchange that, I see this happen all the time, it will result in a stall or a stop, period. It just will. Mm-hmm. So, if that's what you want, which of course no salespeople do, then give them a price when they ask you, way back in qualify. But most salespeople don't want that. So you have to kind of have a more sophisticated conversation and a way to have that conversation.
Gotcha. So what would be a really slick, suave way to have that conversation?
Well, it's some of the things that some of the questions that, I just mentioned. It's talking to them about, their process. It's have they allocated resources? Have they allocated, finances? Are they going to do an internal business case? What does that look like inside of their organization? There's some place you could add value. Let's say you've helped other customers with their internal business case. Maybe you could share a sample with them. It gets the conversation off of how much does your product or service cost, and gets it back onto where are they, what value are they looking for, where are they in their process, and kind of being in lockstep with them.
Earlier in the conversation, you mentioned having a list of value adds that you can kind of whip out, maybe not showing them, but that's your internal reference document that, I can add value in this way and this way and this way. What would be some of the ways that folks can add value, salespeople or the organization as a whole?
Yeah, that's a great question. And before I actually answer that question specifically, the place that you think about what value that you might want to add during a meeting with your prospect, the place you think about that is when you're doing your pre-call planning. So not only are you thinking about those open-ended, really good questions and all that other stuff, the win themes, you're thinking about, you know what, they're probably kind of right here. What might be really valuable for them is if we let them know about this. And so that's why pre-call planning really impacts the effectiveness of that conversation, because you're having a chance to really think about the value in advance and pull from that list. But to answer your question directly, what's on that list? It can be access to data or to trend information. So many times companies have, they purchase good data, maybe trends, that kind of thing, that maybe their prospects don't have access to. So maybe they can share some of that. That would be important that the prospect would bring back to the buying team. So that's one example. Maybe they could introduce that prospect to somebody who's got a similar problem and has been through the process. That's another way they could add value is by making high quality and appropriate introductions. There's tools that companies have that can add a lot of value. One of my clients sells to research universities. And what they figured out over time is that the people that lead these projects to end up buying software to help them with their research projects, getting funding, that kind of thing, is the people that lead these projects aren't generally experienced. They have new people, young people coming in leading these projects, so they don't really know what that whole the buying process looks like yet they've been identified to kind of lead the buying team. So my client figured this out, and so when they're meeting with that person, they ask them, have you been through this process before from start to finish? And if they say no, which they already know that many times the answer is no, they say, you know what, we have actually documented the process because we've been through it so many times with so many different clients, all in the research university space. Would it be helpful if we kind of walked you through that? And the person inevitably says, yeah, that would be literally beyond helpful. So they can add so much value. They figured out a problem and they developed a tool that can add so much value at the right time. So there's so many different ways to add value. Those are just a couple of examples, but salespeople have to, it's hard for them to think about that on the spot, which is why I really encourage the ones that I work with to have that inventory. Once they have the inventory, they kind of get it. When they're doing their pre-call planning, they'll go, hey, yeah, we should do this. We can pull in this, and that's how it all comes together in the customer conversation.
Yeah, cool. It makes me think that maybe some of our listeners should subscribe to Gartner or Forrester or Boston Consulting Group or something, get their research reports, and then just read through them, look for opportunities to share really valuable data and research with their prospects. And then
absolutely. Yeah, for the ones that can afford it, those companies all, put a lot of money into their research. They have got top quality data and insights and research, and so not every company can afford to buy that. But for those that can, absolutely, those are gold. They're not just available on the internet. Those, they're those companies' latest findings. And what I see a lot is, I'll work with companies and they'll have stuff like that, and they're just not using it. It's like, you have this thing, it's so valuable. Like maybe their company has, webinars that are really well done on a monthly basis, really timely topics, and the salespeople are like capitalizing on that. Or maybe they have access to some of this really high quality data and not sharing it in that way. Or maybe their executives, are willing to connect, but they're not pulling that executive in to make that connection. And that is when they really think about that value, it causes them to understand those things that are valuable, and then they have a higher likelihood of bringing that value to their prospects.
Great. Okay, so one last question.
Sure.
How do you help your client prioritize in terms of all the different kinds of selling techniques and all the books and resources out there? They could learn about spin selling. They could learn about selling to veto. And Brian Tracy has great trainings on selling techniques. Grant Cardone, he's got all those closes. He's got a whole book just of closes. I mean, it's just, there's so many fabulous resources out there. How do you help your client figure out, or our listener in this case, figure out what to prioritize where in this process of learning and upskilling?
Yeah, that's a great end question. So I mentioned that I'm part of the Bright Talk Sales Experts channel. We're about 70 sales experts, and that channel has been around for, I don't know, 4, 5, 6 years. Actually, probably 5 or 6 years. I've been on it 4 years. That is free, high quality information and education, and people can go to www.brighttalk.com, or even the Sales Experts has a website, salesexperts.com, and they can search based on the topics that they're interested. So that's one really valuable thing. But Bright Talk, I just saw a statistic from Bright Talk based on 2020, so current statistic, and I won't get this exactly right, but close, that most professionals are spending at least 2 hours a week investing in their personal growth and development. And so I have read and like so many of the resources that you just mentioned, and so many more. But at the end of the day, not everybody can read everything and attend every webinar. But the real question is, are you making that investment on a weekly basis? Whether it's audiobooks or books or webinars or training that your company offers. That does still exist for those that are lucky. At the level of 2 hours or more per week. And that's probably my biggest push. And then as I'm working with clients, is that if I see something that's clear where they have, a void, and there's a really great book or resource out there, Bright Talk webinar, I try to point them in that direction. So I'm constantly trying to make resources and things available. But the first thing is commit to the growth and development. And the second thing is there's tons of resources once you do that to help you with it.
Yeah, great. All right. And again, if you could remind our listener where to go for the pre-call planning guide, and then just your website to potentially work with you and learn more from you.
Yeah, thank you. So my website is www.toplinesales.com. And there's some Bright Talk webinars they can click through there. There's some case studies, but the pre-call planning guide, which every single person should get, is it's at the bottom of the resource page, and they will get it immediately. It's a fillable 2-page PDF. Will change the way they prepare for calls, and it's going to make a big impact. It will. So immediate impact.
Yeah, fabulous. That's very enticing. Thank you so much, Lisa. This was really insightful and information packed, and I hope our listener is going to take some action and implement this stuff at a minimum to start doing some pre-call planning before their sales calls. That seems like a no-brainer.
It does seem like a no-brainer. Thank you so much for having me. It was an excellent conversation. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. And thank you, listener. Now go out there and get that pre-call planning guide and start doing your proper due diligence before each sales call, and we'll catch you on next week's episode.